Ticky Fullerton, thank you so much for joining me. First, Ticky, tell me how exactly you got to know Boris Johnson, and perhaps start by talking me through this photo you took, or someone took, of you at the Oxford Union, the Students' Club, where Johnson was president. Now, that's you closer to the camera doing I don't know what to a shrouded object. What are you doing?
Well, I should say he's never been a PDF of mine, but our paths did cross in the mid-80s because we were both involved in the Oxford Union, which is sort of, I think the FT has called it this week, a House of Commons for teenagers. It's not a students' union; it's a debating society, and it is like sort of looks like the House of Commons. And funnily enough, we were both office holders. He then became president, and that was a debate that I was talking at, which was ironically this House would abolish television. So I was putting a hammer through a TV set at the time. So that was Boris looking a little bit alarmed, I suspect. But look, he hasn't changed, Andrew. He's just the same as I remember him. Full of charisma, you know, terrific orator, not a bad debater, but not nearly as good as, say, a Michael Gove. And of course, Jeremy Hunt at the time, who he's up against, was president of ALCA, which was the Student Conservative Association at the time. So, you know, they were all rattling around back then.
See, right from the get-go, you're mentioning, you know, the charm and the humour, the fun of Boris Johnson, of course. That's been really a constant throughout, hasn't it? How powerful was that charm that you saw back then, and how important has it been to him?
Oh, it's enormous. It's absolutely fundamental. I mean, he may be a buffoon, but for Britons, he's their buffoon, right? He's like Paddington, never far away from a jar of marmalade. And it's all part of his sort of self-deprecation. But you sort of think, people have compared him to Donald Trump. Now, this is ridiculous. I mean, Boris Johnson is an intellectual. He's extraordinarily cultured. You know, he just missed a first at Balliol, but, you know, I mean, he was primed for one. His brother got one. He did classics. He's an intellectual, and this is quite different from Trump. And when you look at the problems, he was, you know, back then at Oxford, he was acquiring a beautiful, clever woman, Allegra Mostanoan, who was a model, part-time model at the time, and his, you know, his love for clever, beautiful women is obviously continued on. I don't think much has changed.
But it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, the charm is there, the intellectual grunt is there. He likes dotting his pieces or his bon mots with phrases from Latin, all that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, I've read several pieces over the past week, in particular in the New Yorker, and I know that's no friend of Conservatives, but elsewhere as well, you know, going through his history, accusing him of making up quotes as a journalist, making up facts, being lazy, being unprincipled. Does any of that ring true to the Boris Johnson you know and have read of since?
Well, look, he has flaws. You know, he's got huge flaws, and in that way, I suppose he is a little bit like Trump. He's got a reputation for being late. He's got a reputation for sort of mischief. Now, whether that goes to you know, sort of lying, or, you know, it depends what side of the, you know, what side of the camp what camp you are in as far as Boris is concerned. I mean, there is a whole anyone but Boris campaign going on. But the thing about Boris is now that he's down to the final two, and now we go out to the membership. And it's a bit like, if you remember, Andrew, well, Donald Trump again is in a little bit of trouble with more allegations of sexual misbehaviour. But at the time when he was elected, that was all stirring around, and women were complaining about him, and those same women went into the booth and voted for him because that had nothing to do with why they voted for Donald Trump. They voted for Donald Trump because they wanted to make America great again, and that is why I think Boris will get through this current little problem that he has, because actually people at the end of the day believe that he's the man that could beat Jeremy Corbyn. And this is really important, because if there is an election, and certainly people in that, some members of the Conservative Party who can't stand Boris could actually force a general election. He'll be up against Jeremy Corbyn, and business, you ask business, would they rather have a hard Brexit or a Corbyn nationalising government? And it's pretty clear which they'd rather do.
No, well, that's what I think a lot of critics of Boris Johnson, and also Donald Trump for that matter, sort of get wrong. They sort of think their leader should be a moral hero, when in fact, for most Conservative voters, they just want someone who's going to do the job for them. They don't need to be a saint, and you have to be honest that Boris Johnson's never pretended to be a saint either, has he?
Not at all, and look, I think you've put it very, very well there. I think he's somebody who is deeply flawed, but as I say, that's partly why he is so endearing to many people. I mean, he's got all this sort of self-deprecating stuff going on, and he milks it. He milks it. That's not to say that his minders, including Sir Linton Crosby, our Australian Sir Linton, won't have their hands full managing him. And obviously, he's under strict instructions not to comment on the incident that happened in his girlfriend's flat, but equally, look, we're learning more about the different agendas from caring neighbours and where they came from. So I think it's there's a lot to actually play out here. The big question is, will he, as he promises to, deliver Brexit by Halloween? Nigel Farage, who is extraordinarily popular, as you know from the polls in Britain, will presumably try to hold him to account there. But that is the one big question. This is the big promise of the man who is talking about Churchill. He wrote a book on Churchill.
Ticky, just lastly, when you saw Boris Johnson dazzling the students at Oxford, did you think this man is going places?
Yeah, oh, sure. And in fact, Oxford has a track record of Presidents of the Union going on to either be ministers or indeed prime ministers, when you think of the sort of people that have been through, from William Hague, Benazir Bhutto. No, I'm sure he very definitely had plans along those lines. And he's a great Australiophile, I mean, he and Julie Bishop, of course, had a great relationship. But he's been out here, on several occasions, and that's another reason why I feel that he's a great believer in this whole idea of sovereignty and free trade and being able to have the right to choose.
Well, Ticky Fullerton, I think it's pretty sure that Boris Johnson will be Prime Minister of Britain within a few weeks. So thank you so much indeed for your insights.
Pleasure.